Advanced Speaking and Pronunciation. Video 2, Syllable Stress. Part 1. Review. Syllables. Syllables are the basic rhythmic unit of English. They consist of one syllable nucleus, which in English is a vowel phoneme, and often a consonant or consonants in the initial and or final position. The number of syllables is equal to the number of vowel sounds. However, there are some examples that can be confusing when it comes to counting syllables in a word. For example, with ed patterns. There are 3 different pronunciations of the ed ending. These pronunciations will depend on the final sound of the original word. For example, if the final sound is a voiceless consonant, where you use air to produce the sound, not the vocal cords, then the ed will be pronounced with a t sound. For example, talk, talked. The other 2, one when the ed sounds like a d sound. This is used when the final sound is a voiced consonant, except for the d or t consonant sounds. Or a vowel. For example, plan becomes planned with a d sound. Stray, strayed. However, the ed can also sound like id, in which case this pronunciation will add an extra syllable. This will be used for words that have a final sound of d or t. For example, the word plant, which is 1 syllable, now becomes 2. Planted, planted. Need, which is 1, now becomes 2. Needed, needed. Later in this video, we will look at some examples where a syllable will actually disappear. But now let's go ahead and do an activity. In this activity, we're going to count the syllables. Now, first, I'm going to say each one of these words, and I want to see if you can guess how many syllables are in each word. Let's try it. Wednesday. Simplify. Opened. Easy. Closed. Fight. Arrangement. Debate. Now pause the video and do the activity. Count how many syllables you think are in each word, and when you're finished, return to the video. Now let's check our answers. Wednesday has only 2. The middle syllable kind of disappears. Simplify has 3. Opened. Remember, this is going to sound like a d sound. So in this case, we do not hear the e. So there are only 2 syllables in this word. Easy. Now remember, it's the number of vowel sounds, not the number of vowel letters. These 2 vowel letters are working together to make one sound. Closed. Again, only 1 because the ed only sounds like the d sound. The e is silent. Fight has only 1. Arrangement has 3. Again, the e here is silent. Debate. Only 2, because the e, of course, is silent. Part 2. Rhythm controls everything. In our previous video series, Intro to Speaking and Pronunciation, we learned that some vowel sounds are longer than other vowel sounds. However, that was helpful in understanding how to distinguish one sound from another. Now that we are beginning to discuss these sounds in words, we will no longer be examining pronunciation exclusively in those terms. As mentioned in the first video, English is a rhythmic language. In fact, some sources call English a stress-timed language, in which syllable stress will now determine which sounds are going to be longer and which ones will be shorter. The Schwa. Near the end of the Intro to Speaking and Pronunciation series, we introduced the Schwa, the symbol you see here, sound as a unique phoneme, but we described it more as a rhythmic idea. The schwa is one of the shortest sounds in English, and can take the place of any vowel letter in a word. It is used to represent unstressed sounds. Let's use rubber band hands, a technique we introduced in the previous video series, to demonstrate how the stressed and unstressed syllables of a word will be pronounced. In our previous series, we talked about vowel sounds that were longer in length and vowel sounds that were shorter. Now we're going to use our rubber band hands technique to demonstrate stressed and unstressed syllables. For example, let's take the word that we described in our previous video, banana. This will now represent our unstressed sound. So this is short. This will represent the schwa. This will represent the stressed syllable. Let me demonstrate now with the word banana. 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 So notice, even though we used na, which in our previous video series, Intro to Speaking and Pronunciation, was a short sound, now we are going to call it a long or stressed syllable. Let's try it again. Follow along with me. Banana. Banana. Part 3. Using the dictionary. In our previous video series, we introduced the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. The IPA uses phonetic symbols to show how to pronounce words. Many dictionaries, including the Longman Dictionary of American English, Dictionary.com, and Merriam-Webster Online, use the IPA to show the phonetic spellings of words in English. The dictionary can also be helpful to determine how many syllables a word has, and where the primary and secondary stress, if any, marks are. Let's look at a few examples of how different dictionaries indicate the following things: pronunciation, syllable division or syllable breaks, and primary and secondary stress. I have taken the word information and looked it up in 3 different online dictionaries: Dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster Online, and the Cambridge Dictionary Online. And I've indicated in different cases either the word and the IPA spelling, or just the IPA spelling. Now you'll see why in just a moment. But first, let's look at how each dictionary indicates pronunciation. Again, these 3 dictionaries use some variation of the International Phonetic Alphabet. Now remember, some international phonetic spellings are going to look different. For example, in the Merriam-Webster Online, they will use the schwa sound to indicate the sound, but they will also use symbols that are more appropriate for native speakers in terms of pronunciation. Dictionary.com and Cambridge Dictionary use more familiar IPA symbols that we have been discussing in this series. Keep in mind the Cambridge Dictionary is also for British English. So we've highlighted in green how each dictionary indicates its pronunciation. Next, let's talk about how each dictionary indicates its syllable division. In dictionary.com and in the Merriam-Webster online, both will indicate the division in the actual entry of the word. So here it's information, and same thing here. Merriam-Webster and Cambridge also indicate their divisions in the phonetic spellings as well. So notice here in Cambridge, they will use this symbol, as we will discuss in just a moment, to separate between these two syllables. But they will also use these little breaks here to indicate where the syllable breaks occur. Dictionary.com, on the other hand, does not use that in the phonetic spelling. Now, in terms of primary stress, all three use the same accent marks. And notice that all three use them in the same location, in the location before the actual stressed syllable. So in this case, may is the stressed syllable, and we can see that indicated here. The same thing is true for secondary stress. Secondary stress is indicated by the downward apostrophe like symbol here. And in this case, the first syllable will have the secondary stress. So this is how we can use dictionaries to also help us in understanding where the syllable breaks are, of course pronunciation, and where to put the appropriate stress when saying these words. Part 4. Primary and secondary stress. As mentioned before, every word in English has at least one main or primary stress. Now note, often this syllable will just be called the stressed syllable. Many sources don't use the word primary. They will just say it's the stressed syllable. As mentioned earlier, the syllable with primary stress will sound louder, longer, and clearer in comparison with the other syllables. With secondary stress, you often find these with 3, 4, and 5 syllable words. However, not all words have secondary stress. This syllable will sound a little weaker than the one with primary stress. As mentioned earlier, secondary stress will be indicated in the IPA spelling with the downward apostrophe symbol you see here. One problem is that in English, secondary stress is not predictable. Therefore, we will not be focusing on secondary stress patterns in this video series. Finally, as we discussed before, there will also be unstressed syllables. The syllables that do not have primary or secondary stress will generally be unstressed. These syllables will sound short and reduced in sound, which help make the stressed syllables sound louder and clearer. As mentioned earlier, often the original vowel sound will be replaced with the schwa or sound, one of the shortest sounds in English. Here on the screen we have 3 words. Each word uses primary, of course, and secondary stress. Now we are going to indicate with the rubber band hands technique these 3 words. But first, let's think of these in a different way. As we stated earlier, primary stress syllables we now need to think of as long sounds. But since we also have secondary stress, we need to think of these as medium. And the unstressed syllable, again, we will think of as short. So now let's watch as I use the rubber band hands technique with these 3 words to demonstrate their pronunciation. Let's demonstrate these 3 words using our rubber band hands technique. Once again, this will represent our unstressed syllable, and this will represent our stressed syllable. Since we also have secondary stress in these 3 words, we're now going to consider this to be our medium or secondary stress syllable. Let's demonstrate first with recommend. 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 Now try it with me. Recommend. Recommend. Let's try our next word, indicate. The stress is on the first syllable, in. The second one is going to be the unstressed, d. And then the third one is going to be more medium, Kate. Let's try it. Indicate. Indicate. Our third word, creativity, the T sound, or syllable, is where the stress is located. Let's try it. Again, cre will represent our medium sound. Creativity. Creativity. Pronunciation tip. The longer the word, the more schwa sounds there will be. Part 5. Syllable stress patterns. Many, though certainly not all words, have a particular pattern of stress. With many words of 2 or more syllables, you can indicate the stress syllable by counting from the beginning of the word. For example, with the word window, the first syllable is stressed. However, with words that use suffixes, endings, it's typical to count from the end of the word to determine the stress syllable. For example, in the word information, we would say that the stress is the syllable before the suffix shun. We will discuss this more in the next few slides. Now let's look at some basic stress patterns. For example, with words of 2-syllable patterns, especially with nouns and verbs, both of these have somewhat predictable patterns of stress. For 2-syllable nouns, we generally place the stress on the first syllable. Jacket, window, table. With 2-syllable verbs, we will generally place stress on the second syllable. Believe, erase, select. Here are a couple of other common stress patterns. With phrasal verbs, the stress will usually be on the particle of the phrasal verb, which will be either a preposition or an adverb. Pick up, put away. With compound words, the stress will usually be on the first part of the compound. Houseboat, baseball. Syllable stress and language of origin. Many multi-syllable words in English are actually loan words from languages such as Latin, Greek, and French, which is a Latin-based language. These languages brought suffixes to English, or at least brought many, which greatly affected the overall rhythmic aspect of the language. Whereas many of the Germanic-based words in English often have 1 or 2 syllables and often unpredictable stress patterns, these Latin and Greek-based words often have very predictable patterns. Now, words that use suffixes generally fall into 2 categories. There are stress-controlling suffixes, where the suffix will affect where the stress will go, instead of maintaining the stress from the original word. This is true for many Latin and Greek-based suffixes. There are also suffixes that are stress-maintaining, which will not affect where the stress will go based on the original word. Let's look at a few examples of both. For patterns that have stress-controlling suffixes, the stress will usually shift. For example, with the suffixes shun, notice how the stress will move generally to the syllable before the suffix. For example, the original word inform now becomes information. So the syllable moves to the suffix moves to the syllable before the suffix. This is also true with the suffix ity. For example, active now becomes activity. So the stress will move to the syllable before the suffix. Some textbooks refer to this as a right shift in stress. Of course, looking at some stress-maintaining patterns, for example, the suffix ness in the word happy, when we add ness, the stress does not change. Happiness. Happy. Happiness. Now note, many of these words are of English or Germanic origin, so this also may have some part as to why it's not shifting. Now, with these particular endings, ICAL, generally they do not shift as well. Historic, historical. But note that IC, which is the suffix you see in the first word, is a stress-controlling suffix. But adding AL does not usually change the stress. So for example, with history, when we add IC, it becomes historic. But then when we add AL, it doesn't change. Historical. Finally, one pattern that is often very confusing is referred to as the disappearing syllable pattern. There are a few words in English that will have a syllable disappear. These words appear to have more syllables than are actually pronounced. The reasons this happens with certain words are because the first syllable is the stressed syllable in the word. And secondly, the middle syllable, the one that will disappear, will typically be an unstressed syllable anyway, usually using the Schwa in its original pronunciation. So let's look at these words and notice how the middle syllable will disappear. Again, all of them share the same idea, that they have a stressed syllable at the beginning, and of course that they're also more than two syllables in terms of their writing. Let's demonstrate. Interesting. Interesting. Notice this syllable disappears. Family. Family. Notice the I in family disappears. Every. Every. Again, notice the schwa plus R here kind of disappears. Chocolate. Chocolate. Restaurant. Restaurant. Comfortable. Comfortable. This one is fairly unusual because it sounds like the R sound is going to go with the next syllable. Comfortable. Oftentimes people will kind of, again, we call this metathesis, when sounds will switch. Part 6, Review. In today's video, we examine the concepts of syllables and syllable stress. In English, every word will have at least one syllable with primary stress. This syllable will sound longer, louder, and clearer than the other syllables, if present in the word. Some words with multiple syllables will also have secondary stress, which is not as long as the primary stress syllable, but longer than any unstressed sounds. Unstressed syllables will often use the schwa to represent their sound. They will be short and reduced in sound in comparison with the other syllables. Finally, many words in English follow a syllable stress pattern depending on several factors, including the number of syllables in the word, the language of origin of the word, and whether the word has a suffix or not. You will find more links about syllable stress patterns below this video in the About section of our YouTube channel. Once again, I would like to inform you of our helpful websites as part of the Kenton ESL Educational Website Series, Speaking and Pronunciation and Vocabulary Development. Both of these are available at our main website, www.kentonesl.org/class-websites. We also used a lot of information today from dictionary.com, which is a very helpful website for pronunciation and syllable division. We'll see you next time for Video 3, Basic Sentence Stress.